Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, continuing with our summer scouting series where we kind of dig into these depth charts, take a look at these teams heading into 2023. We're taking a look at a team that I just feel like is slept on by the national media in the Big Ten West, and that's Minnesota, coached by PJ Fleck. You take a look at this team and what they've done the last couple years. In 2019, 11-2, a really special season. You had the COVID year, and then back-to-back 9-4 teams. This is a group that I feel like doesn't necessarily get talked that much about because it's not always flashy, but they consistently win games. And there are a lot of new faces on the offensive side of the ball that, yes, there are some question marks, but I think the ceiling for this group could be a little bit higher on the offensive side of the ball than we've seen in years past. Excited to get into it now. Before we do again, just want to say thank you to you guys. These are my favorite videos to do because I learned so much from just the different fan bases in terms of names that I should be adding to my notebook, some position groups that I might be sleeping on. So again, if you do enjoy the content, one, let me know in the comment section some players that I might be sleeping on that I didn't mention. And then two, if you do enjoy the content, you want to support the fellas, consider subscribing to the channel. Again, can't thank you guys enough for just the college football community we've been able to build. You guys have shown so much love and support to the fellas, so we really do appreciate that. Without further ado, though, let's get into this Minnesota team. And I want to talk quarterback first, right? Tanner Morgan, no longer in Minnesota. When I talked about maybe you have some question marks, but I think the ceiling is higher, the Greek rifle, Ethan McManus. I tried to say that name multiple times before. I think the Greek rifle, we'll call him that, is a guy that gives a little bit more of a ceiling to this offense than we've seen in years past. Tanner Morgan was good, but he was not a guy that necessarily was that dynamic. He didn't have a massive arm. He wasn't that good of an athlete. I think the Greek rifle offers a little bit more of an upside. And again, you saw some growing pains, but I think that's kind of a good thing. Like, he got his feet wet a lot. I mean, he made his first start in the whiteout game against Penn State. If that's your first start, you're not going to be phased going on the road to any other place. I've been in the Penn State whiteout. That is one of the best college football environments in the country. And so I like the experience that he was able to get in 2022. And now he's taken over in 2023 and probably going to be a little bit more unfazed than he might have been if he had not played much in 2022. Now, the reason I'm so much higher on this offense in terms of upside than I have been in years past, it is the pass catching group. I mean, this Minnesota team is what, 115th nationally in receiving yards last year. I mean, this was a team that they didn't want to throw the football. And I'm not saying you're going to see Minnesota spread them out and sling the rock around. They're still going to want to run the football and be a physical team. But I think a large part of why they didn't throw the football that much is because they just didn't really trust the pass catchers. Like Chris Autman-Bell going down with injury. You look at that team last year, there wasn't that many wide receivers that you felt great about. I think heading into 2023, this is probably the most talented pass catching group that Minnesota's had since guys like Rashad Bateman. And you take a Chris Autman-Bell, I think sixth, maybe seventh year. I feel like I've been saying Chris Autman-Bell's name for like 3 years. And he's a guy that if he stays healthy, can be a wide receiver one. I think he can make some plays for Minnesota. But they also added some nice guys in the transfer portal. Elijah Spencer, Corey Crooms represent guys that have played the college football at the college football level and have actually produced. And so you add that kind of playmaking ability into the team. I feel like you feel good about that. And then Daniel Jackson, I wouldn't sleep on him either. You got 3-4 wide receivers that you feel pretty good about. When last year, when Chris Autman went down, I feel like you didn't really feel great about any of these pass catchers. Now, another guy that you got to mention, Brevin Spanford, one of the best tight ends in the country, probably would have been an NFL draft pick in the top 100 picks had he declared last year. Very, very high on him too. You aggregately look at this pass catching group, I think you're going to see a little bit more of an explosive passing attack than we've seen in years past. And I'm not saying Minnesota needs to go to the air raid system. I'm just saying that it's going to make the run game a hell of a lot easier if you have safeties respecting your ability to push the ball down the field. You're not seeing 8-man boxes consistently because that's kind of what you saw. In Minnesota, because of how good that offensive line was and how good Mo was able to run the football, even though, I mean, pretty much everyone knew they were going to run the football. This year, makes me even more excited for the running attack if they can start throwing the ball and hitting some more explosive plays downfield. Now, we do want to talk about Sean Tyler coming in at that running back position, who, if you give him space, he's not the physical running back that Mo was, but what he does bring is a little bit more playmaking ability. Like when he has space, he has burners to hit the big play. He has the ability to make people miss at the second level. Mo is a guy that one of the best running backs in the country for years, but wasn't necessarily a guy that was consistently going to hit the big play. Sean Tyler, when you talk about where can this Minnesota team find some more explosive playmaking, Sean Tyler is going to be a guy. Now, the offensive line, I think it's hard to make the argument that this group is going to be better than it was in 2022. When you lose a guy like John Michael Schmitz, when you lose a guy like Chuck Filiaga, you have what, 3-4 new starters on this offensive line. It's going to be tough, right? I really do like Quinn Carroll, moving him into guard from Notre Dame. He was a high recruit out of high school. I like that. But you're going to have a lot of new faces. But one thing that you really trust with this PJ Fleck team is he's done a really good job getting offensive linemen, getting them developed, and getting them ready to play football. You see a lot of redshirt seniors, a lot of grad transfers on this offensive line. I think it's a deep group, but I also think it's a group that's experienced and kind of ready to come in and play some high quality football. Again, I don't think it's going to be the offensive line we saw in 2022. That was probably one of the better groups in the country, but I don't think it's going to be that bad either. Now, the defensive side of the football, that's really what's been Minnesota. Joe Rossi, Jim Leonard, Phil Parker at Iowa, they're all phenomenal defensive coordinators. I don't get why Joe Rossi doesn't get the same amount of love and respect. This Minnesota defense, although at times have lacked star power, and you have guys like Boy Mafe who've been picked high in the NFL draft, this is just a defense that plays disciplined football. They are very good in the red zone. They turn the ball over, and it's just a good group. Now, I do think they need some individuals to step up specifically on the defensive line. This was probably, when you look at the numbers, one of the worst pass rushing defenses we've seen from Minnesota in a while. And partly because you lose some guys like Boy Mafe and some playmakers on the defensive line. But I do think that maybe you can get a little bit more production this year. Ja Joyner, a guy that when I go back and watch some 2022 film, he's a guy that kind of flashes. And keep an eye on Chris Collins, the grad transfer from UNC, a highly recruited kid out of high school that just hasn't really come into his own. If you get a nice little change of scenery, I think he's a guy that at least has the tools to be a better pass rusher. And that's if this group can take a step in terms of rushing the passer, you go back and look, hey, just not really a guy that's going to say, hey, pin your ears back, go after the quarterback and get after it. There wasn't really a guy. So I wonder if this year they maybe have a guy emerge who can do that, because I think that will unlock kind of an element of this Minnesota defense that we didn't necessarily see. And another thing you can do in terms of pass rush is just scheme it up. Like if you don't have the dogs to say, hey, go beat this right tackle one-on-one and go after the quarterback, you can scheme up pressure, right? Send linebackers, send a nickel. I wonder if you see Joe Rossi pivot a little bit to that if they don't have a guy that can emerge as being that dominant pass rusher. Now, the back end of this defense, I actually am really, really high on. Cody Lindenberg, I think, is going to be an all Big 12 linebacker, but particularly this secondary. And you lose some guys. Howden you lose. I believe Terrell Smith you lose. But this is a group that, I mean, Justin Wally is one of the better cornerbacks, I think, in the Big Ten. If you asking me to make preseason Big Ten, all Big Ten selections, I mean, Kalen King from Penn State, Will Johnson from Michigan, Justin Wally's probably up there. And then Tyler Nubin, probably a bona fide first team all Big Ten, potentially all American safety, ball hawk, always finds the football. Then you add some guys that are kind of interesting from the transfer portal, right? Tyler Bride coming from Georgia Southern, Craig McDonald coming from Auburn. I don't hate this secondary group. I think it's a group that, I mean, Joe Rossi has relied on getting hands on football. It's forcing turnovers in the secondary. I think this group can certainly do that. And it makes it a lot easier when you have a nice long quarterback in Justin Wally and an absolute ball hawk in Tyler Nubin in the back end. I think this secondary, although lost some production, will actually be a pretty good group in 2023. I want to take a look at this schedule and we talk about this. It is straight up the Wild West. Like trying to pick who's going to emerge out of the Big Ten West is borderline impossible. I want to talk about this week 1 game against Nebraska. You get them at home. It's going to be a night game. I don't mean to say the first game of the season is the biggest game of the season, but when you take a look at trying to play for a Big Ten championship, which is something that's eluded Minnesota, beating this Nebraska team is going to be massive. And if you're honestly looking at the schedule, your 2 biggest games, I think, are Nebraska in the first game of the season and potentially Wisconsin at home the last game of the season. Those are 2 teams that when you talk about who they're going to be competing with in the Big Ten West, I think it's going to be Nebraska and Wisconsin. Eastern. And another thing, if you can win this game and then beat Eastern Michigan, you're looking at potentially maybe being a top 25 team going on the road to play Drake May and the Tar Heels. Northwestern should clean them up. They're one of the worst Power 5 teams in the country. Louisiana should clean them up. Hard to pick you guys over Michigan. On the road at Iowa, probably another game. And I like how this schedule plays out because you play a lot of your kind of big games in the sense of if you want to go play for a Big Ten championship, you get those games at home. Iowa's one of those games that you go on the road for. That's a hard place to play in Kinnick Stadium. I don't think they've won there in like 20 years. And so maybe buck that trend a little bit. Then Michigan State at home, Illinois at home, 2 games. Again, when we talk about getting to a Big Ten championship game, those games are the ones you have to win. Purdue, that's going to be a tricky one. I don't like that you play them later with all those new faces. Maybe they get a little bit more experience and play together a little bit. But then Wisconsin, at the end, hard to pick them going on the road to beat Ohio State, but Wisconsin at the end of the year, I could see that game being winner goes and plays for a Big Ten championship. And this Minnesota team, again, it's not flashy. It's not necessarily in the media. You have Matt Rule in Nebraska, Luke Fickell taking over at Wisconsin. You have a lot of storylines in the Big Ten West. Minnesota not really being one of them. But Minnesota, like it really embodies what PJ Fleck's trying to do with this program. You just keep rowing the boat. And this is a team that when I look at their depth chart, I think they'll be solid in 2023. But even if you look at 2024 and what they can be with how like some of the young talent they have on the team, I do think that could be a special season. But Minnesota, again, is a team in 2023 that is certainly capable of winning the Big Ten West. And I think there are a wide variety of outcomes because you have some new faces and some unanswered questions. But those questions could be answered, and they could be answered in a big-time way. I'm excited to watch this team again. Does not get enough love in the national media because it's not necessarily a flashy team. But you look at what PJ Fleck's been able to do over the last couple seasons. This team wins football games, and they don't win in a flashy way, but they win football games. I'm excited to watch them in 2023. Again, appreciate the support you guys have all shown, and we'll talk to y'all later.